I chose the Kansas State Masters of Agribusiness program for two reasons. The first is program flexibility. I wanted to be able to go to school while maintaining a full-time job. The second is that it's agriculturally focused. I intend on staying in the agriculture industry long-term, and this program complements that with a faculty and staff that know and understand my long-term objectives.
Thank you for joining us today for the Meet the Farm Hands video segment. I'm your host, Hannah Pagel, and today we are speaking with Don Parrish with the American Farm Bureau Federation. Don, thanks so much for joining us today.
Hannah, it's my pleasure.
Well, to kick off the interview, let's just kind of go back to the very beginning. Tell me about your Alabama roots and kind of how you made your way out to DC.
So I was very fortunate to have grown up on a farm. And, you know, farms that really connected with their community. They were very diverse. We grew cotton, peanuts, dairy cattle, beef cattle, pigs. So it was really in my blood. And, you know, from that, meager beginnings, I started, my college career at the local junior college, but ultimately went to Auburn University. Got an undergraduate degree in agronomy and soils and a graduate degree in economics.
Okay. And to kind of tell me a little bit more about how, you grew up in rural Alabama, and then how did those skills that you learned there or that just upbringing kind of influence the work that you're doing out here in DC?
So what is really, kind of fascinating about my history is that, the farms I worked on were not just the opportunity to drive a tractor. It was really an opportunity to get to know what it took to make the farm run. And that was a big blessing, because ultimately it was so passionate. I was so passionate about that I wanted to make a difference. So when I had an opportunity to learn more about farm policy, policies initially that focused on things like growing cotton and cotton programs and loan rates and target prices back then, I jumped at that. And then when I had the opportunity to start and come to work for the American Farm Bureau in 1988, it was really a dream. It was a dream that I could make a difference. It was a dream that I said, 5 years, we were moving from South Alabama to the Chicago, Illinois subdivision or suburbs. We didn't know where we were going or where the road was going to lead, but it ultimately led here in Washington, D.C., and it really started with a passion for agriculture. And I tell people, I have a career, but I started with a passion, and I think I'm going to end with a passion.
Mm-hmm. So kind of explain a little bit more how you made the transition from being an economist at Auburn University to then coming out to working for the American Farm Bureau.
A great question. The one good thing about being an economist is that you kind of understand what makes people make decisions, how they evaluate all the cost and the benefits that go into making choices in their everyday life. So it was really kind of an easy transition to public policy, because that's what you do in public policy. You weigh the wants and needs of the American people, and you try to put that into policy that makes sense. That makes sense for, in the case of farm programs, it makes sense for our food policy. In the case of the environment, do we have a cleaner environment, and do we provide the kind of flexibility that farmers and ranchers and in industry need to operate? So that was a, kind of got our start there. What was interesting, the way I got into the Clean Water Act is I was working with rice farmers. And the Corps of Engineers all of a sudden one day decided they wanted to regulate rice levees, particularly rice levees that are farmed in Mississippi, Louisiana, Texas, and Missouri. And what was interesting is that those levees are temporary. Farmers plow them up one year, they plant rice on the field in that year, they plow them down and plant soybeans on that same ground the next year. So it was really one of those issues about, did the Corps of Engineers actually have the authority to tell farmers they couldn't grow rice, or they needed a permit if they put a rice levy into place? And that was a long road from there to ultimately all the things that I have learned over the years about the Clean Water Act.
You bring up the Clean Water Act, which kind of goes into my next question. I am very curious, a big chunk of your career has been dedicated to WOTUS and just water issues in general. Is that, the rice story you were talking about there, is that kind of where your passion for these water issues came up? Or can you kind of explain what made you want to dedicate so many years of your career to water issues?
Absolutely, that was the start. But what fascinated me was, how the Clean Water Act differs from farm policy. Farm policy, farmers can kind of walk away from farm programs if they choose. Very few do, I understand that, but if they choose, they can walk away from that. The Clean Water Act is a strict liability statute. And what I mean by that is farmers can be criminally and civilly liable for crimes that they commit, whether or not they realize they are committing them under the Clean Water Act. So for me, the passion was to keep farmers out of jail and to keep, it back when I began, farmers racking up $30,000 a day penalties. Because what we wanted to do is to help farmers understand, number one, what the rules were so that they could comply, and then number two, more importantly, is make sure that EPA and the Corps, when they developed such rules, they did so in ways that farmers could actually farm under those rules and not run the risk of having a violation of the Clean Water Act.
Mm-hmm. So over the course of your career, how would you say, you've seen farmers react to environmental policy changes at a ground level?
That is a really interesting question. And I will say that farmers started probably making the shift from really just paying attention to prices and income in the mid-1980s. And what is interesting, in the mid-1980s, we were just coming out of kind of a farm depression. We had run extremely high inflation rates in the latter part of the 1970s, early 1980s. People refer to that as kind of stagflation. We had land values that were just going through the roof. Paul Volcker came in as Fed chairman back then. Most people remember that name. He come in and really pushed land values, pushed interest rates up. And when he pushed interest rates up as high as he did, it just hammered land values, just hammered them. And it put farmers in a really awkward situation because all of a sudden all their assets were worth a lot less. And their ability to function and cash flow their operations was a significant impact. So as we built those safety nets into place, because of that, in the mid-1980s in our Farm Bill, we also started building in more conservation efforts too. We tried to give farmers the incentives they need in order to protect the land. And it was really more of a comprehensive Farm Bill that was developed, and I guess that's what I was saying. The reason for it was inflation and high interest rates and lower land values, but we gave farmers the opportunity in the conservation arena to do a lot more starting in the mid-1980s. So that's how the things really started turning. And the good news is that farmers have really embraced that, because most farmers, if you talk to them, they want to pass their land on to their descendants, on to their sons and daughters in better shape than they got it. And that's so good, from my standpoint, because I tell you, there's a cliche, and it's not a cliche, but because it's a value. Farmers care about water quality, but they want clear rules. They want to be able to operate, and when those rules are so expensive they can't comply with them, then the conservation title of the Farm Bill is there for them to kind of fall back on. Mm-hmm.
What would you say is like one lasting memory that you have from working on the navigable waters rule?
The lasting memory is, I think there's a balance. We started down the road of trying to have a more clear definition at a point in time when farmers had to depend on the Corps to make case-by-case determinations. And that was wrong. I mean, the Supreme Court intervened in waters of the U.S. issues in the year 2000 and again in the year 2005. And the result of that is they really had to depend on the Corps to make a determination. And that meant farmers were getting into trouble, unable to comply with the law until they found out for sure what the Corps was going to call a water of the U.S. I think we over-rotated during, no doubt, we significantly over-rotated during the Obama administration because they technically wrote the term navigable out of the Clean Water Act. The Trump administration, I think they put a very fair, a very understandable definition in place. Did it get everything in there that farmers and ranchers wanted? No, but it sure provided the clarity we needed to operate. This administration is going to do it again. And it's anybody's guess as to where that's going to wind up.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I'm just curious because now we've seen 3 administrations now try to take a stab at writing the definition of waters of the U.S. Is it possible for WOTUS to be written in a way that lasts for years to come?
I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful. I want to paint you a picture if I could. The Obama administration. The real issue here is not things that most people think about as water. It really is those features that only have water in them for a short period of time after it rains. Think about, not even ditches, but just features on the landscape that probably fill up with water when you have a big rain. Those were categorically in under the Obama administration. Those are categorically out under the navigable waters protection rule. What's in between that is case-by-case determinations. That leaves the burden is on the government to prove jurisdiction under that scenario, and that may be where the Biden administration is going. But it also leaves farmers up to a lot of liability, because they're going to look at that piece of property and they're going to see land. They're going to see land that they're going to farm through, and all of a sudden they're going to be liable to citizen suits. They're going to be liable to being second-guessed by the Corps if they come out and look at that property. And President Duvall at the American Farm Bureau Federation says the last thing farmers want is to have an army of lawyers and consultants just to figure out how to farm the land. If we go back to that case-by-case determination, farmers are going to have a real gap in the ability for certainty, and that's going to be a problem. That may be the middle ground, but it's going to be a tough place for people that have to use the landscape.
Mm-hmm. So I kind of want to talk about your time working as a lobbyist. I'm curious how you maintained your network out here in DC, given, there's a lot of people who are constantly changing jobs on Capitol Hill and in the agriculture industry in general. So can you kind of just talk about how you worked through that and just how you maintained your network?
The really great thing about working for the American Farm Bureau Federation is we have an absolute wonderful grassroots. And we're talking about, grassroots farmers down at the local level. But we also have tremendous state farm bureaus, and they really are our eyes, ears, and front line when it comes to working with members of Congress. I think our job here at the American Farm Bureau is to make sure that we work with committee staff. We depend on our state farm bureaus to work with the personal staffs of those members that they elect to both the Senate and the House. But we work with their committee staff that actually get in and understand the legalese of the policies, whether it be on taxes or trade or the environment, the clean water or farm bill. And it really is the ability to kind of work all of those pieces of the puzzle together from those relationships that farmers and ranchers have with their members of Congress back home to our state farm bureaus and what they bring to the table in the American Farm Bureau Federation. That is a really, really strong glue in our public policy effort. For us, it really is about forming relationships. And I tell people that is the key to being a good lobbyist. It is relationships. And in this town you have one currency, and that's your word and your credibility. And you have to protect that at all costs.
Mm-hmm. So as you get ready to enter retirement, looking back at your career, would you say there was something that you wanted to get done in ag policy that maybe just didn't have time to get done?
That is, yes, there is one thing. Probably the biggest gap that I'm going to leave is the whole issue of conservation compliance. Everyone understands that farmers need to protect the soil, they need to protect wetland resources, But one of the things that USDA has really fallen down on is giving farmers due process in that process. Farmers deserve, if they're right, to go into a process and reach, a conclusion where they can win. The way USDA has stacked the deck on conservation compliance is really problematic. Even when farmers win an appeal, it's referred back to the agency, and the agency can do that over again. We have examples of where farmers have been drugged back through the appeals process 4 times and won every time, and the agency still, they will not relinquish the fact that they're wrong. And when they're wrong, whether it's on the merits, whether it's they're arguing about whether or not there was a wetland there and there's not, or they're arguing, is this land prior converted or is it not, or did the agency follow their process properly? I'm 33 years, I wish I would have spent a lot more time on that, because that is something that is, farmers, generally, do what the agency says because they don't have a choice. I believe that right is right, and people deserve a due process, and we don't have it there.
Mm-hmm. Kind of looking back again at your career, what would you say has been the biggest change that you have seen in agriculture policy?
I would say the biggest change I've seen in ag policy is kind of twofold. One is the realization of how important trade is. We have a very limited population in this country and only so many mouths to feed. And if you're looking at where our world's economy is expanding, where populations are expanding, it is outside of our borders. And one of the things that I'll warn people in this country about is if we don't do our jobs right, they're going to be producing more food and more agricultural products in other countries that have less environmental regulations than we do and less technology. You think about precision agriculture, you think about all of the good things that go into making our environmental footprint smaller, making our production more sustainable. We have that hand over fist in this country. If some of the developing countries and even some of our more imported competitors, they don't have that level of technology and sophistication. We need to capitalize on that, and that's something, and I think agriculture understands that and needs to benefit from it. On the other hand, I think we've lost our ability to communicate with the urban community, and I think farmers and ranchers need to figure out a better way, not just to take a message to the urban community, but figure out how to kind of, the Stephen Covey approach of, 7 habits of highly effective people. Learn what the other community is concerned about, and then figure out how to communicate with them on things that are important about how their food is produced. That's clearly changed in my career, and it's something that I think farmers and ranchers, they have a good story. We just need to figure out how to get them to share it on a personal level so that more people embrace it.
Mm-hmm. Well, talking about personal level and all of that, we've talked a lot about your career, we've talked a lot about water issues, so one thing I love about this segment is we get to kind of get a glimpse into your life outside of work. So just to start off, why don't you tell me a little bit more about your family?
So that's a great question. I have a lovely wife, 35 years and counting, and I have a wonderful daughter and a son-in-law that live in Atlanta, and a beautiful son and a great daughter-in-law that live in Dallas, Texas. I'm hopeful that we're going to have grandchildren here before long, but my wife and I want to travel. We've been to certain areas of the globe already, and we've found places that we want to go and explore, and places we want to go back and enjoy. Mm-hmm. So, we're going to do that all around the world. We're also going to do that around the U.S. I tell people I've been to every state in this country except Alaska. I plan to make Alaska if COVID allows, in the next 12 months. And, our country has so much to offer. We're foodies. We enjoy food. We enjoy people. We enjoy rural landscapes. There's just so much community that we want to enjoy there in this country and outside of this country that, we still want to do that while there's still some tread on the tire and we're young and able to do it.
Is there a place that like you want to go back because it was just so beautiful culturally, environmentally, something like that?
Yes, there is. A couple of places I will call out. We've had just a wonderful time in Patagonia area of South America, and we've had just tremendous visits in Italy. So in the agricultural area, where they grow their food as well as their wines, it is just breathtakingly beautiful. The people take their agriculture very seriously. It is quite small, and they do, take great pride in that. But it's a lot of fun to be there.
So I've been told you're kind of a dog whisperer.
Well, that I really. I had I told people when I retired, and we had our little retirement get together yesterday, it really is about making friends and then finding mentors that are gifted and smarter than you are. And in my past, I have had people that were just wonderful mentors in the area of pets and dogs. And to me, I learned a lot, but some of the people I learned from knew what their animals were going to be thinking before they were thinking it. I really enjoy pets, and I enjoy dogs. Good pets are good family members.
Can you kind of talk about, who was a mentor to you in your career?
I can. A couple, or maybe three. The first one I will start out with, and if you're an old-time Farm Bureau person, you would remember the name John Hoseman. John Hoseman was an economist at the American Farm Bureau Federation when I started. He was the kind of guy that always pointed back to farmers and ranchers. He says if it means something at the turn row, if it means something to farmers and ranchers, that's important. He clearly, started me on a career of, put first things first, family, and then listen to farmers. Lastly, the last 15 years, Paul Slagle was my boss here at the American Farm Bureau Federation. He was a people whisperer as opposed to a dog whisperer. He was very supportive, very low-key and behind the scenes, but just a tremendous asset in terms of, his knowledge of the Hill, his knowledge of, how to work the Hill and work issues. Those were great. And I'm also going to call out Tom Hebert too. Tom Hebert has been a friend from the day I landed here in Washington, D.C. He is the kind of guy that works both sides of the aisle. You have to do that in agriculture. We have to protect that. I guess, he was quintessential being able to do that. I'm also going to give a shout out to, folks like Ann Simmons and Josh Maxwell, Colin Peterson. Those are just, they're giants in my book. Maybe another Republican congressman, Bob Goodlatte. Those guys were really the kind of people that could roll up their sleeves, work across the aisle, and get work done. And we need more of that. There's a lot more in the public policy arena that unites us than divides us. And right now we focus too much on what divides us, and really on things that are unimportant.
So before we wrap up the segment, I always like to end it with this question, but if you could go back to day one of your career, knowing everything that you know now, what advice would you tell yourself?
I don't think I would change a thing. It's been a great career. It's been more than a career, it's been a passion. It is, and I told people yesterday when we had the opportunity, it's kind of like Warren Buffett. If you enjoy what you do, you'll skip the work. And I think I've done that.
Well, Don, thank you so much for coming on today.
Thank you.